Welcome to Living Faith, everyone. We're so glad that you decided to join us. At Easter, we started a series called The Beginning of Something Better. And the resurrection is God's sign to us, His gift to us, that life can be better, that it can get better. And so we've taken that idea of the power of the resurrection, and we're applying it to the baggage that we all carry into our lives. We started this a few weeks ago, talking about this idea of baggage. I read a story about a man who was at the Chicago airport. He'd come back from a long flight, and he was going to get his baggage. He was an older man. He got a little dizzy, and as he went to grab his bag, in his dizziness, he fell on the conveyor belt, the stainless steel kind that moved through, and carry the baggage out into wherever. And so as he fell onto that belt, he grabbed hold of his baggage. He couldn't get up, and he got carried away back into the darkness in the area, behind the back flaps, and the luggage goes wherever, and then it pops out. Well, as he was going through that little experience, his first thought was, I have always wanted to do this. And his second thought was, I might get arrested for doing this. And his third thought, which was probably his best one, was, I'd better not get off this thing. So he stayed on it, and he came around to where it popped out into the light, and sure enough, when it popped out, there was a official-looking female guard looking at him saying, you are not supposed to do that. And he said to her, have you ever tried this? She said, no. And he said, don't. Sometimes, without wanting to, we fall onto this conveyor belt, this journey called life, holding tightly to our baggage and not knowing how to get off, even when we're going somewhere we don't want to go or somewhere we shouldn't go. How do we let go of this baggage that we have, that we cling tightly to? It's hard to do, and we're looking at how to do that in this series. Last week, we talked about the importance of forgiveness. And to kind of illustrate that, Woody put this picture that I wanted to show you. I thought that really got at the meeting really, really well. How forgiveness is difficult. There's the guy with the hammer. There's still blood on the hammer. How do you forgive someone? How do you get past that, you owe me, and not let bitterness take over your life and take over your heart? How do we get into that? Last week after the message, I went down to the cafe, and by the way, welcome to you in the Cafe du Jour. I'll be joining you later with discussions about this message. Last week, we talked about that a little bit down there, and how do you do that? It's easier said than it is done. And these messages we'll talk about down there after they're over. But it's that idea of forgiveness and getting past the you owe me stage. That was kind of a step one. And we ended that message talking about courage and the need to have courage. That it's one thing to forgive, but to reconcile, to reconstruct the relationship, which is what reconcile means and what we're talking about. How do you reconstruct the relationship? That can't be sugar-coated. That's not easy. That's tough. And it takes an enormous amount of courage. And so we're going to look at courage this morning and courage on how to do that. Now, the Scripture is clear that we get both blessing and baggage from our family. This is Exodus, kind of our text that we're using, that kind of illustrates this. You shall not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. There's a lot going on in this text about jealousy and idols and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. We've looked at that some already, to what that fourth generation is, and punishment. It's not punishment. It's you learn dysfunction. It stays in a family for a long time. That's just the result of what happens when we try to build our lives without God. And so that's what he's getting at when he talks about that. But he's also talking about blessing and how there's a blessing that comes to those for thousands of generations. And we need to focus on both. We tend to just focus on the baggage. That's kind of our default setting. And we forget that there's enormous blessing that comes also from our families. Your family is both a family of grace and a family of suffering. That's true for every one of us. Your family is a family of grace, and it's a family of suffering. That's what it means to have baggage. That's what sin means. That's what that generational dysfunction is. And we all have both. All of us have both. And so it's a matter of learning to deal with that suffering and with that baggage. And that's what God is getting at when he says, don't make these idols. These idols are about making things that simply cause suffering. Idols are things, addictions, where we try to do life without God. And we're all addicted to our ego. We all try to make our life work without God. It doesn't have to be addictions the way it's defined popularly. We all have that in us. And jealousy is this idea of God's zeal. Jealousy for us is baggage. Jealousy is something you don't want in your family because it creates baggage. Cain and Abel is the first example of that. It happens right after the fall. How did that turn out? Not so good. If you've seen the movie Amadeus, it's a fascinating movie of how jealousy can destroy us. It's about Antonio Salieri, a gifted classical musician, and of course Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who was even a greater musician. Salieri made this commitment to God, make me a great musician and I'll honor you. But Mozart, who was profligate and all kinds of other things, was much better than he. Salieri's jealousy destroyed him, and it destroyed his relationship with God. C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien were great friends, and as Lewis became popular, it caused a rift in their relationship. There was some jealousy that developed, and later in life, it made it difficult for them to relate to each other because of jealousy. Jealousy can destroy us. And I'm going to do one message just on jealousy because I think it's important to look at what it is and what it isn't. But let me say this, in talking about God's jealousy. It gets back to the idol. And again, an idol is something we get addicted to. And when we get addicted to something and try to make life without God, put something above God, it creates dysfunction. The other 10 commandments start to get broke then. And all kinds of things happen. And so when God says, don't make these idols, I'm jealous, he is talking about doing things that destroy us. And when that happens, it kills God to see that happen to us. It literally killed him in sending his son. But when God sees us destroy ourselves, it just undoes him. He says, don't do that. And the word jealous can be zealous. And we have idols in our world. In fact, next week, while I'm on this little rabbit I'll chase another rabbit. Next week, I'm going to talk about, on Mother's Day, how family can be an idol, and especially for conservatives. This is our idol. Conservatives have this family idol. And I think what it does is it makes moms feel a ton of guilt. And so I'm going to talk about that. Moms, I'm going to be your best friend next week. Come. And bring your mother. And if your mother wants you to come, come. Because I'm going to talk about how this idol really, I think, puts guilt on moms and becomes quite destructive. When you look in the Bible, you see families of grace and suffering. You don't see these families sometimes, I think, that we can try to get at. Well, idolatry just destroys us. And Jesus said, even if you don't get the intent of these commandments, then it can destroy you. And so that's what God's jealousy is. And what gets overlooked with God's jealousy is why would the creator of the universe so deeply connect himself to you? Why would God care so much about you that he'd let his life get wrecked over you? I mean, it's really about his love. We want less of God's love, not more, if we don't want God to be so zealous for us. Why would God open himself up to sorrow and anguish and all that human rejection and that betrayal? Why would God open himself up to betrayal? He doesn't have to do that. It's amazing grace. It's his love. So that's important to keep distinguished between God's jealousy and ours, just like God's anger isn't like ours. Our jealousy is about revenge, and we do it in little ways and little words and little comments. God's jealousy is not that way. So I just wanted to make those comments before I set up this morning, which is about reconstructing these relationships, reconciling. And I've asked Andrew Brahm to come Many of you know Andrew. He's a counselor, and he and I have talked a lot about this. And this way, if one of us is wrong, I can point it out. So
Awesome.
I wanted him to come and, bring your baggage. That's good. I'm glad you brought your baggage up here.
Well, it's comfortable.
Yeah.
I like it.
Some of that looks like my baggage, actually.
It does, doesn't it?
You got some
Like
of the
there's
baggage
probably
I've got,
similarities.
yeah.
What's the name on this? No? It's
Yeah,
neat.
well, yeah, I've seen that baggage. I don't
You
know
like
about
that?
this. What's this stuff?
Well, it's...
You got more?
This way I got it with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you... but...
You can
I
sit
can't-
over there? Okay.
Well, I can't quite get this. Can you help me get this
Oh,
off?
you need some help with this?
Yeah, it's hard.
I don't know, man. Good
hard to-
night. You need to put this
I
down.
can't hardly
What's in
see it.
here anyway?
Hold
What
on.
is this?
Hold
What?
on.
Good night.
Come on. I can
Man,
hardly see-
what?
Oh, there it is.
What are we?
Okay, hold on.
Can I look in here?
No.
No?
No,
Okay.
no. Let me show you. Don't go rifling through my baggage, dude.
Okay.
See, this is the stuff. Here's the...
Touchy.
No, it's all right.
Touchy.
It's okay. I'll show you. Just relax. See, here's the cool
I'll
stuff.
reconstruct the relationship right there.
See, yeah, thanks. So this one right here, this is the one. This is the blessing. This
The
is
blessing?
Yeah, this is the
okay.
blessing from my dad.
Scoot over here so they can see you downstairs.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
So this
I
is
mean,
the blessing from my dad,
Yeah.
who taught me how to be loyal. Right. So I like to wear this one out here.
So what's that got to do with loyalty? It looks like something you'd blow your nose in.
Well, it's a loyal towel.
What's that?
It's a loyal towel.
What's
And
a
then-
loyal towel?
Yeah. And then
Oh,
it's,
I
it's
haven't
with
seen
me
that.
everywhere. It's
Oh,
loyal.
okay.
Then up
Oh,
here,
I see. Okay.
I have
Sleep
this
with
cool. I have this cool blessing from my mom. This is one I like to show too. My mother taught me playfulness.
it? That's your signature.
Yeah, that's it.
I've seen that on
The
you.
spirit of playfulness.
I've seen
Well,
that baggage.
Hey, this is guaranteed to diminish road rage. You cannot be angry when you're
That's-
driving with
yeah.
a cloud nose on.
Yeah.
You simply can't be.
So if someone gets mad, you just put that on, it diffuses it?
That's right.
That's
right.
that you're helping people with their baggage.
Absolutely.
Just buy a little red
Absolutely.
ball.
That's right. This over here, this is for me, this is the towel from a scoutmaster when I was young who taught me the value of a kind word.
A kind word?
kind word.
So it's a kind towel.
Yeah.
Not a mean towel, but
No,
a kind
kind
towel.
towel. I like that
Awesome.
though, and these are the ones you can see. Now the stuff inside, well, there's some stuff inside.
Is there some stuff inside?
Well, there is.
Maybe save that for later? We ain't
Maybe.
got time.
We'll see. We'll see. I don't know if I
Need
don't really know
another
if I
hour?
want to unpack
Pack a
all
lunch,
that.
huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
We'll do
it's
that one on the,
comfortable, man.
We'll do that one on the boat sometime.
It
then.
feels weird to not be wearing my baggage.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
not having that on my back.
feels good to lay it down, huh?
Well,
Well,
it does.
scoot over here. Maybe you can help the rest of us lay our
All right.
baggage down.
All right. Oh, wait a second. Need my stuff.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You know.
Oh, you need some thoughts?
Yeah.
Good.
These resources.
Good. There you go. Resources. All right. So Andrew and I have been talking about how do you find the courage to deal with his baggage? Because it takes courage. It really does. And we kind of outlined 4 things because we're just so smart we could just do it. And
Because we
a
need
lot of it
direct-
came from reading, I'm sure.
We need direction in a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
right. So we listed several things, and we just really as a brainstorm a little bit, and
Sure.
things that we've thought about and I've read, and I'm sure you have, and that kind of thing. But one of the areas that and I've already talked a little bit about this, was the courage to identify the struggle, to identify where you're really suffering. And the courage just to name that and to own that and deal with that.
Yeah.
So talk to me about ways we can do that.
Sure. So that first, we're talking about courage, and I like looking up the words, like getting the definitions.
I put to identify our hurt.
Right.
Is that the right way?
Yep.
Okay.
Identify our hurt, identify the places of our pain, of what we're afraid to wade into. Sure, and it takes courage to do that. It takes wholeheartedness. It takes moxie. I love one of the synonyms for courage is listed in Merriam-Webster, and you almost have to say this with a British accent.
Go ahead.
Intestinal fortitude.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
Takes
well played, O'Chop.
Thank you. Yeah,
Bless
but-
you, bless you, my boy.
It does. It takes courage to identify our hurt. This baggage that we carry, and Pastor Robert has made a point, and I think it's really important to talk about the blessings that we receive from our parents, from the church, from the world. But also, there are the hurts, there are the pains, there are the traumas, and those are the things that keep us in bondage to ourselves. Those are the things that we can bring to the cross, and we can bring to Christ, and He's there to heal that for us. But in order to do that, we have to be able to identify that.
Okay.
Now, that takes many of these hurts can be subconscious. There are these operating systems that we have that we've taken on early on in life. Most of the time, these hurts, or a lot of the time, these hurts, these traumas, take place very early in life. It's part of the belief structure that we establish when we're growing up. For example, Chad will identify with this. When you're hitting a golf ball off the tee, you swing that driver, and where you make contact with the ball, if it's not perfect, if it's not flush, it may be off just a tad at the tee, but 200 yards down the line, you're in the woods, right, Chad?
Well, I can identify with that.
Yeah.
Chad's usually in the fairway, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
told you you'd be here today.
That's why I don't
Yeah.
play with
That's
him.
right.
I get too much baggage when I play with
But
him.
the point is that some of these false beliefs or some of these messages or some of these hurts that we've taken on, it starts a trajectory that will continue. As Robert said earlier, we tend to see the world and we tend to see things in a way that reinforces our foundational beliefs. So how do we identify those hurts? What are those foundational beliefs? This is where it takes some help, usually. We see one way out of our eyeballs, right? That's just the way it is. And so we need somebody else often to reflect objective reality to us, a more objective reality. Byron Katie writes about loving what is, right? Now, for example, Robert, you and I, we could have a box here on stage with a hole in it on one side and a hole in it on the other side, and inside that box is a chair. And as you look through the chair from one side, you might describe the chair in one way. I might look through that box to see the chair from the other side and describe it in a completely different way. We're describing the same thing, right? But we're seeing it differently. Our perspective is unique. And so our perspective is on the world based on some of those beliefs.
So if I have pain, it's going to color how I look at reality? Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
Okay. And you need someone else to help you see that.
That's right.
And that could be, I thought about that. I thought that could be a book, it could be a person, a small group, it may be professional help, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
And you got to kind of be honest about that and say, what do I need? Because you might need.
That's right. Well,
Right?
it's a process, right?
Yeah.
This is a process.
I mean, that's part of the courage of admitting is, I think,
Is that
I need to
willingness
admit what the
step
level of
forward.
my need is.
That's right.
I may think, oh, I can get by. Well, really?
Yeah.
That's
right. Well, and two, the other part about this too, as we follow Christ, as we seek to immerse ourselves in God's reality,
in the gospel,
not our reality, but His reality. What happens is, if we're honest about this, our sensitivity to our own monkey business gets turned up. We have less and less tolerance for our own pain and our own hurt. This is the way it's designed. This is good. And as we start to recognize some of those things, here's a great example. If you have an argument with a spouse, and you realize before long that the argument isn't about the issue, the argument's about the argument. It's the same one that you've been having over and over again, maybe for years. You begin to realize that it's not that issue, is it? There's something deeper. There's a hurt. There's a fear deeper. That the acronym for fear of FEAR, of forget everything and run. That can be our default position to I'm just trying to push it away. I don't want to look at it.
Okay.
So that's where it takes some willingness, some courage, some moxie to say, not quite. Even if we don't know what it is, not quite sure what this is. I just know that I don't feel right. I keep getting in these positions or in these relationships where the same negative, hurtful cycles keep happening.
And as I thought about that, I've talked about that some already, but I thought it was good to bring up again because if you don't identify your hurt, one thing that will happen is, it seems to me, you'll keep blaming somebody, yourself, others, the system, and if you're always blaming someone else or the system, it's going to be hard to reconstruct a relationship, I think. And there's some people you can't reconstruct a relationship with, and sometimes we're that person that's hard for someone to reconstruct it with. Because as long as I can blame someone, I don't need it reconstructed, or I don't need to reconstruct it. Sure. I don't need to reconcile it. It's because they are X, or they are, doing something or behaving.
Yeah, that's right. We tend to externalize our pain, right?
Yeah.
We tend to say that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's somewhere out there.
Right.
When in fact, that's that problem out there is impossible for us to change. That's not our venue for change. The only thing we can do is to be willing to change ourselves, to see,
Right.
be honest about what's going on with us.
Right.
This is our area of work, not out there,
Right.
because it's an impossible task. When we insist on the world changing in order for us to be okay, we lock ourselves into a position of being victimized, because we are at the mercy of a broken world. And if we think, well, I got to change that in order for me to be okay, we're always in that victimized position, that disempowered position.
Yeah, and to me, you see that, when I'm blaming or condemning or attacking or you see that happening, then I'm not letting go of, whatever the hurt is. I'm solving it that way rather than saying, wait a minute, my response here, I need to identify.
Right.
And like I've said before, and I love this quote, it's from Annie Chapman. I've said it in every message, and I'll keep saying it. I think it's worth writing down. Christ can't heal suffering we insist isn't there. I mean, you may pray for Jesus to heal you or help you with this, but if you insist the suffering isn't there, how is he going to heal that? So you have to identify for that purpose.
Right, and we need help to identify it.
Yeah, we do. And part of our journey in prayer is that, yeah. And that's why we need others too.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's move on. The second area that we talked about is courage to deal with the rejection of others. Courage to deal with the rejection of others. If you show me your baggage, I might, I might be, really, you have that in your baggage?
Yeah.
And I might reject you. So
That's right.
how do we
So,
deal with that?
Well, the courage to deal with the threat of rejection of others. This is a real risk. This really is. It is risky to risk rejection by being more transparent, more vulnerable. Brene Brown writes a lot about vulnerability and the tie-in with shame, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there is risk. There is risk in relationship of that because we may be rejected.
How do I deal with that?
Well,
someone's going to look at me as a failure,
Yeah.
not a good pastor or parent or...
Sure. Well, here's part of it. If my sense of self-worth and esteem is dependent on what you think I am or how you perceive me, then I can't risk rejection. Because if you reject me, then who am I? I'm lost without you. This is the nature of codependency. I think you think, I think you think, I think you know what I mean, right? It's being other-centered. So once again, where this risk of rejection of others, it's a misunderstanding of the core of our identity. When our identity is based in each other rather than in our identity in the Lord, who God says we are at risk of being hurt by the rejection because we might be rejected by people.
Is that identity come? We all have it. So it's not like some have an identity and some don't. We all have how we look at our value or worth.
Sure.
So can you identify that through inner monologue, through the inner dialogue that's going on in your head or your monologue? I mean, how do you identify where your identity is? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that we identify where our identity is by our idols, right?
Okay.
What's important to us. When we have you mentioned talking about family, how that can become an idol. If that's our identity, I'm okay as long as my family is fine and everybody looks good, right? So I'm over-identified with that, right? Another way to...
and let me just comment on that. So if I have that idol, I know that's an idol if I wig out.
Sure.
If I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't think that about me. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
So
yep.
yeah.
So
I'm just saying, how do you identify these things so you can say, oh, okay, because that then becomes a prayer thing and a courage thing to say, I need to quit making that so important to me.
Right.
Or find out why it is and do some work.
Again, with all of these things, how do we identify these things? Yeah. We are incapable of, I think, really incapable of identifying these on our own. If, Rick Warren says, he writes, people don't change when they see the light, they change when they feel the heat.
Heat,
right?
Fire,
which is a great quote because we are comfortable with our baggage. We've worn it for a long time. We're comfortable with that. So it has to be, I think, in conversation. It has to be in relationship. This is what we're made for, right? God created us to be in relationship with Him and with each other. Okay. That's the fishbowl that we swim in. So in order to identify that, the threat and of rejection of others, we have to be able to be in conversation with others, whether it be a small group, whether it be a prayer partner, an accountability partner, a spouse, someone that you're telling the truth to, that you're risking telling the truth to. Now, that could be difficult too, right? You can't trust everyone, right? You just simply, that would be foolish. But we have to have somebody that we trust. We have to have somebody that we can go to.
So it sounds like another factor then of how do you deal with this fear of rejection is part of it's being wise in who you do share with.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. if you
Well, and I'm sure that many of us have had experiences
Yeah.
of being too open, too vulnerable with someone who then used that against us.
Yeah.
The danger in that is that we then tend to think that that sometimes that we take that on as our fault or our problem, when it might just be that person's baggage. You know, it's maybe that person's baggage that's being projected on us.
And that's why they're criticizing you or
Sure.
rejecting you is
Yeah.
because of their own hurt people hurt people.
Mhm.
You know, I
That's
thought
right.
of that verse, and I think it's in Galatians, bear one another's burdens, and how that can apply to this because it sounds like the only way you can help each other, you could say that bear one another's baggage, and the only way we can do that is to help each other.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of the overarching theme here too, isn't
Yeah.
it? That we need each other to get through this. We need God, we need Christ, we need each other to start to unpack this stuff, to take it out, these old beliefs, these things that we were taught, that we learned, that we took on, that were planted in our hearts, and take them out into the light and say, you know, is this really true? Is this still true? That, you know, when I was 3 years old, I got lost at Southdale Mall. I still remember it because I was so terrified, right? Well, that, you know, there's still a visceral impact from that memory. But you know, the world was unsafe for me. I was 3 years old. I was terrified, and it took me, you know, it takes time to recover from that. You know, you may have memories of things that happened as a kid that you still remember. Well, there's a reason you still remember them. Memory is implanted on a cellular level in our bodies. We carry from first breath to last and maybe after, we carry all of the memories. Every experience we've had, we carry with us. And so it continues to impact us.
You know, and that whole thing too, I think some of us, we want to trust other people. There's a closeness you feel when you trust someone. So you got to kind of measure that in yourself sometimes, or I had to. I've had to learn that I have to measure that carefully, because you want to trust, so you trust before you think.
Yep.
Let's go to the next area that we talked about where you need courage, and that's the to deal with our fear. I can't get better. You know, my case is hopeless, or
Yeah.
I'm not going to improve, or
Right,
talk to me about that.
Sure, the face that fear, that and the courage it takes, that we're too damaged to heal, that we can't change. So this is an existential fear that somehow.
What do you mean by existential?
Well, this is existential. So this is a question about our very existence.
Okay.
Are we part of, or are we separate from? You know. Here's where the shame piece
Existential.
comes in.
This is a part of how we are going to be and live, and can't divorce ourselves from.
That's right.
Yeah.
Part
I
of
know
our-
what the word means. I'm just helping my fans.
Part of our fundamental belief system, right?
Yeah.
So this is where, going back to Brene Brown and her work with shame, and I know you've talked about this before, the difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt is feeling badly or feeling remorse for something that we've done, an action, a behavior, a word, whatever it might be. That can be a very good motivating factor, right? Shame is being told or believing that we're intrinsically bad, that there's something fundamentally wrong about who we are, not what we've done, and that's terribly damaging to us.
Yeah.
Now we know that we're broken, right? We know that's why we need the Savior, right? We know that, but to be shamed for behaviors or things that we do or actions is terribly damaging to us, and that adds to this fear of, are we too broken to heal? So the courage in that, and this again, there's a connection here. We talked about this a little bit earlier with sharing each other's burdens, right? There's a connection with confession. For example, in 12-step recovery, there's what's called a fifth step, where you do a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself, good and bad, blessings and baggage, and then you share that with another person. Which can be a pretty daunting task, you know, because we want to keep these things secret. But what it is, it's a shame buster. It's a shame buster, it's an ego buster. We share this stuff with another person, and we realize that, you know what, the things we've thought and done and said and felt, we're not really that different from other people.
Yeah.
We're not. We're broken in the same ways. The details may be different, and that helps relieve that shame. But it's in that relationship with between us and God, between us and another person, that we learn that we can heal. And then we have that experience of healing, sometimes when we see that healing in another person. It's we're much more easily able to see healing in another or change in another than we are in ourselves sometimes. Sometimes we're the last to know.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that goes both ways, both with healing and also with when we play out and act out our baggage. Yeah.
Okay, good.
A good friend of mine, Kelly Reynolds, talking about too damaged to heal that we can't change. My friend Kelly Reynolds says to me, if you know suffering, you know me. You know, there's that connection. And Jesus knew suffering.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he knows us.
Yeah.
We're not alone in this, and that's the truth.
We all come from families of grace and suffering.
That's right.
You know, talking about that rejection of others too, I've been wanting to say this and I didn't know where it might fit, but we're talking about baggage you get from the home, but you get baggage from all kinds of places. You know, you get it from work, you get it from church.
You get it from the mall.
You get it from the mall, yeah. But the thing too is work and church at least, you also get blessing. And again, it's easy to focus at work or church just on the baggage that we get from church, because you do. I mean, if you're around church people, you're sitting next to sinful people who have baggage, and you know that's going to come out at times.
Sure.
And so you're going to get some of that at church, but you can get a lot of grace too.
Oh, absolutely.
Or hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's just a matter of focusing on that and stuff. We got about 3 or 4 minutes to deal with the last one. I didn't know if you wanted to do that or if you wanted to talk about this armor, losing your armor,
Oh,
giving
yeah,
up idols, or...
Let's do that. We'll take that fourth point next time. But
Okay.
this idea of armoring, I know that you brought it up in past weeks, that when we, in this belief structure, some of these hurts, these habits, these hang-ups that we learn early on, that we take on as part of us, this is who I am, and they're errant beliefs. It may not be true. Over time, we start to identify as we grow, 20 years down the line after that missed tee shot, we tend to start to identify with the armoring rather than the authentic self, rather than who we are in Christ, made in the image, men and women made in the image of God. And that becomes our personality. We say, I am that. And it's not true. It simply isn't true. But again, that armoring takes time, right? The knights, when they would armor up, it would sometimes take them hours to armor up before a joust or before a fight. It takes us time too, and help to take that armor off piece by piece, bit by bit. I was talking to Lori about this, and she was helping me with some of these thoughts. And one of the points she made was, she said, be sure to remind yourself and everyone that this is process. This takes time. This isn't flipping a light switch. It's not one day I make this decision to be a better me, and then it's done. This takes time. It takes courage, perseverance, which is another term. Perseverance is a big factor in courage, just that willingness to keep on keeping on. In AA, they talk about progress, not perfection. And we just keep coming back. There's a lot of that encouragement. And we had that series earlier on encouragement and how important that is.
So how do you, give me some armor that a person might need to look at specifically and deal with?
Sure, here's number one is self-righteousness.
Okay.
Right? I'm the center of the universe. I'm egoic, I'm ego-centered. It's all about me. We assume that what we think is right, right? And this is a great place for contemplation. If you quiet down long enough to start listening to your thoughts, you'll realize just how full of monkey business you are. We really are. They're just thoughts. Just like our feelings are just feelings. They don't have power until we assign power to them. And so to start to step back a little bit, to get quiet, and to realize that our feelings, great information for us. Our thoughts, great information, but that's not who we are.
So how do you do that without putting a bunch of content in your mind when you're quiet or alone, or what helps you start to hear that voice and that inner monologue?
Well, I think to a great extent it's practice, right?
So what do you do when you practice?
You sit quietly.
Okay.
You really, literally, you just sit quietly. You turn off all of the radios, all the stuff, the iPad, the phones, all of that.
Do you have words in your head?
You might.
Okay.
That might be helpful. It might be
Like a
helpful
verse or
to
something?
meditate or contemplate a scripture. It might be helpful. I find that meditating or contemplative prayer in a group of people, is really powerful. It's really powerful.
Are you asking God to help you identify that monkey?
I think that does happen
inner
just
monologue?
just by the practice of being quiet.
Okay.
Is that those thoughts, those repetitive thoughts, those self-centered thoughts will start to bubble to the surface. And it takes time. We live in a culture that is, we're addicted to stimulation in 100 different ways. I think part of the reason for that too is that we have as a culture, as a people maybe, we have a difficult time being with ourselves because we're afraid of what we're going to find. But there's nothing to fear.
Or we're bored?
Or we're what?
Bored? Or is it more fear?
No, I think it's fear. I really do.
Okay.
But the fact is that there's nothing to be afraid of. We are who we are. There's help for us. There's healing for us. This is what God calls us to, right? Is His grace. There's risk in facing these fears. It takes courage to move forward, but the reward is a more vital relationship with God, a more awakened understanding that with every breath of every day there's opportunity, that God is offering us something.
Yeah, that's a good segue, actually, and it's a good kind of a reminder of the whole Ten Commandment thing, which is keep God God, make Him first. And when you see the psychological benefits of that and how it can keep family from being dysfunctional, it's not a slam dunk, because you have to sit there, I think, and be aware of God and aware of yourself and aware of what God might want to work in you, instead of being with God to learn more information about being righteous or something, more about just being open to, I have idols in my heart. We all do.
Yeah.
Any theologian that's ever written has said, the heart of man is an idol-making machine. We just do. And so maybe that's a good place. God, what are the things that are way too important in my life? What are the idols that are way too important? Because that's going to get played out in a dysfunctional way at some point. It's not going to just be, it makes me feel good while I do it. It's going to be, if it's an idol, if it's something that I have to feel good about me, then it's going to get played out. And we got to end, and we got another point that we're not going to talk about. But the fourth one was that the pain will increase if I change. And so I'm going to have Andrew come back and do a message on maybe that or something in this context. Andrew's got a degree in, counseling, MA, LMNOP, QR, what MA, I don't know what they are. Yeah, there's too many of them. But he's good at this stuff, so I wanted you to help with that. And
I appreciate that.
I love your idea, and this was really a good segue of just being with God. And while you take communion, and while we have the ushers come up, we're going to put a verse up here to talk about reconstructing relationships. And I'll have the band just stay seated for a minute. They're going to come up here in just a sec, but I want to read this first. But maybe you can take this into your time right now with God, just to be with God the way you need to be, just to talk to God about the suffering in your family. And again, we all have it. I always like to tell young people that, because I know when I was young, I was always like, well, there's got to be families without suffering. And I've learned, no, they're not. There's sinfulness in every family and suffering. And so it's there for all of us. So as you think about that, maybe these verses will help you. Whatever you need to do to just be quiet and say, God, how do I get you into my life? Maybe you've tried to do life without God. We always do it. Believers do it. Maybe you're an unbeliever and you're doing it. You maybe want to rethink that, your need for a Messiah. Jesus said, I won't condemn you. I get that you're trying to do life without me. If you'll open yourself to me, just see what happens. See if you make me God, what might happen. And for us believers, just to come back to that. And so ushers, go ahead and come forward, and I'll read this while we're doing that. Because of this decision, we don't evaluate people by what they have or how they look. We looked at the Messiah that way once. We got it all wrong. As you know, we certainly don't look at Christ that way anymore. Now we look inside. That needs to land somewhere in your psyche, in the sticky part of your brain, in my brain. What we see is that anyone united with the Messiah, they get the beginning of something better, a created new order. Again, that needs to land. Maybe you don't believe that. Maybe you've been a believer 20 years and it felt that way once, it doesn't now, and you've forgotten the process. That is a process, like Andrew said. Maybe you need to go back to basics. The old life is gone and new life burgeons. Look at it. All this comes from the God who settled the relationship between us and him. Go back and look at what God has done for you if you're a believer. It may have been a while since you felt it, but look at it. He settled this, and then he called us to settle our relationships with each other. God put the world square with himself through the Messiah, giving the world a fresh start by offering forgiveness of sins. This is the grace. This is how God does family. God has given us the task of telling everyone what he is doing. We are Christ's representative. God uses us to persuade men and women to drop their differences and enter into God's work of making things right between them. We're speaking for Christ himself now. Become friends with God. He is already a friend with you. So let's have the band come up, and I'm going to put one more verse up there. How do you do that? In Christ, you're in him, you have him. God put the wrong on him who never did anything wrong so we could be right with God.